that is the introduction for tonight's show. Yes. Welcome to Kiss 100 London, Kiss 102 Manchester, Kiss 105 Yorkshire and the East Coast. This is Fabio. This is how we do on Kiss 100. Going out to most parts of England once in a while. Kicking off the show, the sound of J&J and Ritchie, tune entitled Gravitational Pull, from a forthcoming album on Moving Shadows, Storm from the East. Lots of goodies up in store tonight. Got stuff from Ronnie Size, brand new exclusive. Also, we've got stuff from Hidden Agenda, Creative Source, Metalhead's Prototype. The whole shebang. It's all here tonight on Kiss.
Kiss, 100% stamina. Nobody can funk for longer. Nobody.
We're going to be chopping and changing as we do. Sorting out the men from the boys, the good from the bad. A big shout going out to the whole Manchester crew that was down at Sankey Soaps last week for the Groove Connection night down there. That was absolutely massive. Large respects going out for everyone who attended, and I will be back. That was my first gig in Manchester for a little while, and it was absolutely smashing. Big shout going out to the Jam MCs, my man Chris from back in the day. Still holding things down in Manchester, and I'll be down for you soon, no doubt. Sending this one out to Chris, the rest of the Jam MCs and the Manchester crew. 102 Kiss. Johnny L, XL Records. A track entitled Common Origin, with the Piper and the B-side blowing up the place right now. I'm in quite a quiet, kind of no ranting tonight. Just letting the music do the talking. Right, we're going to take a pause for a cause. Back after this with something from Creative Source. Once again, hello to Kiss 102 Manchester, Kiss 105 Yorkshire and the East Coast, and Kiss 100 London. Getting into the swing of things, getting into my stride is Fabio. Kicking the flavours. Sending a big shout out to family, everybody. It's related to me. There's thousands out there, trust me. Also a big shout going out to Phil and Lance and everyone that works down there at Vinyl Distribution. This is forthcoming on Creative Source, the sound of Danny C and Mike Piers, otherwise known as Primary Motive, a track entitled Serve Chill. quintessential summer sounds. Summer is nearly here. You might have noticed I'm a bit of a weather freak, but the winter does depress me severely. Everyone looks better in the summer, don't you agree? And a primary motive, a track entitled Serve Chills. Precisely how we do on Kiss. We're reaching out to the heartlands. Got to mention a big congratulations going out to Rupert Fotek. His seminal Nai 10 Ichirui is number 37 in the chart, and you will not hear a more uncommercial drum and bass track in the top 40 ever. So congrats to the guy who keeps it real. A true innovator. Respects to the man called Rupert Fotek. We got the year of the big players coming out to play this year. Albums from Goldie, Fotek, Grooverider, Lemon D, Dillinger. Already albums out there by Boy Meringue, amongst many others. Also watch out for albums from Omni Trio. And a probable album from Fabio. Not. I don't think so, not this year anyway. Right on cue, speaking about Boy Meringues and albums from an excellent new album out. This is the sound of Boy Meringue. Big shouts going out to Graham. A diverse selection of hard beats, coupled with smooth rollers. That's how we like it. Big shout also going out to Paul Thomas and the rest of the Kiss crew. Remember, you're listening to Kiss 100, 102 and 105. Sending this one out to the Mighty Rider. Also tracks coming up a bit later from Grooverider's Prototype Years compilation.
stamina. Kiss 100% stamina. Kiss 100% stamina. Kiss 100% stamina. Kiss 100% stamina. Nobody can funk for longer. Nobody.
All of the changes the world has put me through, but it's alright. I feel it, but it's alright. I feel it. This feeling that you get can change things. The power of the groove will always see you through, but it's alright.
ripping up the place at the moment. The ubiquitous Ronnie Size. The remix of New Yorican Soul. It's Alright with our Armand Van Helden mix on the other side. Ronnie trashed it.
The music's in my life.
Remember you're listening to Kiss 100, Kiss 102 Manchester, Kiss 105 Yorkshire and the East Coast. It's Fabio, your host, on the microphone. The final hour we do a little thing called a jazz step. If you don't know what it is, just listen up. Because it's alright. Big shouts going out to Karina. Not forgetting Shy. Also to tell you, Tempo each and every Thursday night. The other night we had a wicked session with myself and Goldie on the decks and blowing up. Goldie came down as Luke Skywalker straight from the Star Wars premiere. You know how it is. Remember, it's Kiss. Of tribal jazz. Sending that track out to Raf, all the warriors down there in the South London area. Not forgetting Wayne and Cliff. Also a big shout going out to DJ Addiction. Watch out for that guy 97. We're going to take yet another ad break. We're going to come straight back with something hot. If you're thinking everything's gone hard and there's no beauty in the music anymore, check this track out. Absolutely beautiful tune. Get ready for them lazy summer days. And one of the most precious artists on this whole scene, DJ Pesce. Check this out for class and quality. Remember, you're listening to Kiss 100, 102 and 105. Wherever you are, welcome. pressure from the man they call Pesce. Don't know much about the name or any credentials on that track. All I know is remixed by Pesce and it's running. Sending that one out to J Magic, also Source Direct. The Hertfordshire Massive in effect. Also, I'd like to say a big hello to a cab driver who took me back from somewhere the other day, and yeah, it was me, because you thought it was some kind of bogus chancer. And I got the letter. I'll be responding to that letter very soon. Thanks for writing. Remember, we're rolling on the one, the Kiss 100, 102, 105. It's Fabio, in case you didn't know. Here's more pressure from Creative Source. Big shout out to the guys, Roy and Dave, Subject 13. We've got some business to sort out soon. So big shout going out to Giles Peterson down there at Talking Loud. And of course the Groove Connection tour moves ever onwards. And we saw some excellent dates last week, including everyone, got to say hello to everyone that went to Atomic's warehouse down there in Maidstone. That was a jamming night. Saturday night, we're down at Cardiff University. Myself, Grooverider, and the Jumping Jack Frost. Playing the funky drums. Remember, wherever you are, you're listening to Kiss. Jazz style.
Jazz style. jazz style.
I got the money.
The sound of Sub 13, a track entitled Jazz Style. Watch out for the video on this. Creative Source going for it in the 9/7. Remember, each and every Thursday night down there, opposite the Astoria, you've got Tempo, myself, Grooverider, in residence each and every week. That's coming along nicely. Big shouts going out to Nikki, all the other guys that work down at the Mars Bar. Right, we're going to go into another ad break. After that, we have what we call the Jazz Bet, the final hour. You get Sublime. Back after the break.
Kiss 100% stamina. Nobody can funk for longer. Nobody.
remember, you're listening to Kiss 100, 102 and 105. Kiss in effect. Kicks off the jazz step on a track appropriately titled Jazz Stepping. Shouts going out to the Rogue Unit, massive, everyone down there at La Bello Blanco. Also a big shout to the Promised Land crew. Remember the Promised Land every fortnight down there at the end. Tomorrow night you've got the good looking massive. Also, got to tell you about Happy Hardcore, Kiss London on a Tuesday. In rotation you've got the hierarchy of Happy Hardcore, Slip, Matt Dougal, Force and Styles. In rotation, that's Kiss London, starting from April the 1st. Happy Hardcore for the masses. This is the jazz step as we roll through the final hour. Helen T, a track entitled Stay Calm. Son of Helen T. Shout out to Helen and Barry. The sultry, smooth sounds of the jazz step. shout going out to Ray Keefe, also the rest of the Massive down there at Black Market Records. And also a night not to forget, the Leisure Lounge and Groove Connection, Metalheads and Groove Connection down at the Leisure Lounge. Next week, Saturday, running till 6 o'clock. Groove Connection meets Metalheads at the Leisure Lounge. We're going to go into a 3 in a row.
100% music.
Special there. Get into the heart of what we call drum and bass. The music that has come from humble backgrounds to the most wanted thing in '97. I'd like to send that one out to Sarah. Help the scene along. Sorted out everybody's business, nice and neat. Still going strong. Also remember the Groove Connection tour hits the road over the weekend at the Cardiff University. Myself, Grooverider, Jumping Jack Frost in the place. Also, we have next week Saturday absolute roadblock guaranteed for the Leisure Lounge Metalheads meets Groove Connection. The whole crew representing. Shouts going out to the G-Man, the Goldie. Also a big shout going out to Meredith and everyone down there at Metalheads. Sending that one out to Sarah, the sound of PFM. Track entitled Outlaw. Before that you had Creative Source Pressure at killer cut from The Hidden Agenda, a track entitled 12 Minutes or 12 Seconds. Big shouts going out to Jason and all the guys. Before that you had a track entitled Destination. Remember, it's Kiss 100, Kiss 102 Manchester, hello, and Kiss 105 Yorkshire and the East Coast. So now special greetings to the one called Digital. Also the Wednesday night sessions 9 till 11. Kiss London, Jumping Jack Frost, Hype, Kenny Ken, and the LTJ Booker. Let's kiss. We'll touch that dial. Gotta send this tune back. The day I bought this record, it was just full of crackles. One of them things. Before the break, you had the sound of Omni Trio. Forthcoming on Moving Shadows. Big shout going out to the Rob Haig. You know, we're gonna have to link up soon. We're into the final 15 minutes or so left. From the Art of Noise album, this is Lemon D. Big shouts going out to Lemon Dillinger, not forgetting Clarky. Also shouts going out to Doc Scott Chet, the Coventry crew. It's Kiss 100, Kiss 102, Manchester, Kiss 105, Yorkshire and the East Coast. It's Fabio. Remember, Grooverider's in your hot seat next week. Right, I think it's about that time that I love and leave you. Remember, next week in Kiss London, you've got the Grooverider, of course. For more of the same, but in the Grooverider's unique style, as per usual. If you're listening on Kiss 102, you have DJ Hype next Sunday. Hype, one of the most experienced DJs on the whole circuit, coming from another angle, but with the same flavour. The drum and bass flavour. And let's not get it confused, drum bass jungle. It's all breakbeat culture. It's the breakbeat era. So don't let that fool you for a second. We're all coming from the same place. Also, Kiss London representing will be Dougal, Slipmat, Force and Styles and the Happy Hardcore Tip. That is from April the 1st. Next Thursday, or this Thursday coming, Tempo, myself and the Grooverider.